Today is an important milestone, a women's tribunal focusing on poverty in one of the world's most richest cities, New York. As many of you know, our city actually has a budget larger than some developing countries, and yet locally we could still not meet the Millennium Development Goals.
Extreme poverty is generally defined as living on less than $1 a day. In the United States, an individual or a family is deemed to be living in extreme poverty when your annual income is $20,000 a year. The following speakers that you'll be hearing are focusing on Goal 1 of the 8 Millennium Development Goals, and that is the eradication of extreme poverty and hunger.
As a woman, I have to put up with physical and mental abuse. I have been in New York for 20 years living in fear about my immigrant status, sexual abuse, alcohol, depression, HIV/AIDS. Poverty, economic dependence, emotional dependence, and fear are forms of abuse.
So while teen pregnancy rates are declining nationally and in New York State, New York City's teen pregnancy rates are higher than the national average. And when broken down by neighborhood, the Bronx and Central Brooklyn individually have higher rates of teen pregnancy than both the citywide average and the national average. And so in regards to maternal health, adolescent mothers are at increased risk for having low birth rate babies and for having higher infant mortality rates. The thing is, most of these problems can be reduced, if not prevented, with early prenatal care.
There's been many studies shown where the same resume with a Muslim name and another resume with the same qualifications with a name that does not sound Muslim, 80% of the time that resume is taken over a resume with a Muslim name. The stresses on families, stresses on people losing jobs and the situation that they're in has caused an increase in domestic violence in our community. Women are less likely to access services in fear that they may be reported or investigated.
I was a woman that was blinded by ignorance and led astray down a path of self-destruction. I reside in the village of Harlem in New York City, where at least 1 in 10 women are HIV positive and have a history of incarceration. I myself tested positive in 1991 and received the AIDS diagnosis in 1993. I challenge you to slash the HIV rates in our community by half in the next 5 years.
I do not think that the average New Yorker or the average reporter really understands the emergency that we are facing now with the poverty among women of color and women in general. If you look upstate,
violations happen in the specific, everyday, local lives of women, and the remedies are local and national remedies. What the global does is to reinforce our ability to demand those locally.
And I say this with deep humility coming from South Asia, that is women today, and I speak of women together, young and old, experienced, inexperienced, literate, illiterate, rich, poor. Women today have to re-engage in women's issues. There is an apathy that is there sometimes amongst women who have had privilege of forgetting where that privilege came from. Reminding ourselves of that long journey is not a bad thing. Reminding each other of the need to be engaged is critical. So engagement, and I say re-engagement.
What we're seeing today is that there are very many similarities between women living in developing countries and women living in developed countries.
There are lots of activists on the ground working towards the development of a vision that is locally anchored but universal and global in its vision. And that's part of what bringing human rights to the United States is about. And that's what this particular event was about. So we're talking about women in New York City suffering violations and deprivations that can be experienced almost any part in the globe as the testimony surfaced, but doing it within the context recognizing their human rights and their relationship to the rest of the world.
Point is to say that even in the developed world, in these donor countries, in the richest city in the world, home to the UN, we have women who are experiencing abuse, women who have been trafficked here, women who are living in poverty, relative poverty to the relative wealth in this country, who are facing discrimination based on all of their identities. And the women in that room left knowing that they were part of now a global sisterhood, and that was the point.